different methods depending on what I need. I guess what I'm saying is that in over 6 years of making patterns, it's become almost second nature. I can look at a design and pretty quickly identify what kind of pattern shapes I would want to start with. Also, when you've created and collected a lot of patterns, you have a lot of bases to fall back on. So for example, I can look at a design with a round head, know that I want to make a 4-piece pattern for it, and I can go through my previous 4-piece heads and start with one of those. So over time your experience and portfolio will naturally speed up the process, and you'll find it getting easier the more you work at it. So if you get lost amidst my rambling, feel free to drop me a message and I'll try and explain it in more detail, break it down further, whichever you need. The simplest way to get started with patterning is to look at nets. In basic terms, a net is the two-dimensional shape that, when folded together, or sewn in our case, creates a 3D shape. Starting with simple shapes and their nets can help you get a good grasp on the makeup of 3D shapes. For example, there are 11 nets that would make a cube. Each of these shapes, if you cut them out and sewed them together, would make a cube, but you might find different results when making them with different fabrics. The different placements of the pattern and the seams might also affect the shape, and say you're working with Minky, you might want to split them up even more so that the pile faces the direction you want them to go. That's where experience and working on different patterns will come in. I whipped up 2 little cubes as a test, using 2 different nets. Of the 2, I prefer the green one, as the pile on the Minky is pretty uniform. It's hard to see on camera, but I feel like the blue one has a bit more structure. Because of the stretch, these cubes bulge out a bit, but interfacing foam or a non-stretch fabric would cut that down. Getting to know these nets and how basic shapes are made will give you a leg up when patterning. But these nets will only make very basic shapes, and while you can use them to make a cool electrode, for most plush and patterns we'll need to take these shapes and nets and start trying to cobble them together and edit them to make the shapes that you need. When looking at a design that you want to plush, try and break down the elements into what their basic shape is. I've got this model of Eevee from the new games. The new Pokédex models are great for seeing all the angles. I've covered patterning heads in previous videos, and though I'd like to revisit them, let's work with the body for this video. Eevee is pretty popular and is a simple design. Ideally for drafting a body pattern, you'd want a flat side view so you can get a better idea of the proportions. But this 3/4 view is good for showing all the other pieces, like the chest and the inner legs. So for tutorial purposes, we'll go with this one. I'm going to outline it and then simplify it further by removing all the fur. Next we'll try and pick shapes that would make up the body and the legs. Most patterns for ponies and other similar animals like this would actually treat the body like a triangular prism, a Toblerone. The top of the triangles become the spine, the base will later be a belly and a chest gusset, and the sides become slightly more realistic flanks. These basic nets make up a very wonky, odd, robotic looking shape. So next we're going to start messing around and editing them to make them look more natural. Together the body and the neck form an L shape. We could leave the body and the neck separate, or start talking about darts, but let's keep this episode simple and just fuse them together. Here you can easily see which planes will be the sides and which will be the chest and underbelly piece. Then we can start changing up the outline to make the shoulders, the chest and the butt looking more natural. Normally with cylinders, their net is one long rectangle that rolls up to become a nice even tube, but it's not very often that a leg is a nice even tube. It doesn't look very natural, so when sewing, the cylinder will be split into 2 sides, with 2 seams attaching them together. This allows us to shape knees, thighs, even paws. We can make one side wider than the other for a chubbier leg. Again, we could leave the legs separate. I did this on Wriggle to give him big chunky shoulders and thighs, but for most patterns like this, you can add them to the body piece. To really simplify things, I could have just said get a profile image and trace the body and legs. But going about this a long way means that we can now see how the shapes are put together and understand the how and the why behind it. Then, when you start working with patterns that are a little bit more complicated than trace the profile image, you can apply this to the pattern. I coloured each section of the Eevee in a different colour so that we can see what shapes their bodies are made of. A basic quadruped pattern will have two sides to the body, a gusset and an inner leg that matches up with the outside legs on the body, also soles of the feet. I'd have liked to have talked about the gusset and shaping the inner legs and the underbelly together, but that's kind of a subject in and of itself, and I'd like to do a video that's dedicated to gussets completely at some point, and I think it'd be better suited being in that video. From this pattern drawing, I've drawn up a little quadruped pattern. It's a bit more chibi-esque, but let's put it together and chat a little bit about more ways to understand patterning. If you're not interested in what's essentially a speed sew, then feel free to skip ahead to look at the finished pattern. I always like to start with the spine with these patterns, but there's no hard rule that says you have to. Another way to boost your understanding of patterns is to work with other pre-existing ones. I'm going to slap a big old disclaimer here. If you're thinking of playing with a pattern, especially with a view to selling the finished art or your own patterns, you have to make sure this is okay with the artist. Most will have rules like this in the pattern's files. If they do not assume it's okay. You must ask them. If they don't answer, do not assume it's okay. When somebody creates a pattern, they own the copyright for it. Taking their pattern apart and editing it will be considered taboo unless they've okayed it first. That being said, it's a great way to learn, so collecting a nice portfolio of different patterns can help you understand how shapes are made. When I make a pattern, I always mark where I want the major parts of the gusset to line up with the body. It helps me work as evenly as possible, and these marks are normally ones that I created while patterning the gusset anyway, so I leave them in. You can also take apart shop-bought plush. Again, I do not recommend doing that to a handmade one. It would be extremely rude and an insult to the maker. I've seen people dismiss the idea of looking at factory-bought plush because they're generally very simple, as they're supposed to be able to be put together on a factory line. But simple can be a good place to start, and it's not all bad. I based my little lions on this big lion that I've had since I was very small, and that plush was a big success. You can see in the gusset that the armpits are curved inwards. This curve pulls the legs in so that they don't splay. I'll cover this in more detail in a gusset focused video. The same goes for the tops of the inner legs. The downward curve creates sort of a dart effect that pulls them in. If your plush's legs are splaying, chances are you should take a look at this part of the pattern. The curves on the inner leg especially might need to be deeper. Turning the leg right side out makes it easier to sew the armpit, I've found recently. I normally leave the legs till last as they're the fiddliest bit. Repeat this 3 more times for the other legs. Now for the feet. I'm a big cheater when it comes to patterning feet. I could do a video subject on it, but it would be on how to cheat your way to good feet. I also don't stick many pins in them at this scale. Even my smallest pins are too clunky, so I just take it slow and arrange the seams as I go. Repeat 3 times more for the other feet. At this point everything is sewn, so let's turn it, stuff it, and look at the finished result. I put together the pattern with different colours, like the illustration from earlier, to show off how all the parts will come together. As I said previously, the best way to improve with patterning is to work on it, learn from the wonderful world of maths, and from other patterns. Hopefully though, this video should give you a leg up. Thank you so much for watching. As always, let me know in the comments what you thought, if you have any questions. Thank you for watching, and goodbye!